of Hong Kong, America is with you. The people of the world are with you. Your freedom matters. Your courage is powerful, and it is inspirational. I also want to thank the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation for shining a light on the darkness, the torture, the murder, the oppression communist regimes inflict on men, women, and children each and every day. As we speak, the people of Hong Kong are standing up valiantly against the Chinese Communist government. They are engaged over an existential battle over what Hong Kong will look like in the future. Will Hong Kong be forced to submit to Communist China's ever-increasing control over the people of Hong Kong, or will they take a stand and achieve freedom from China's clutches? I, for one, believe in freedom. Over the last several months, we've observed the acts of bravery from the people of Hong Kong and the mindless brutality of the forces cracking down on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. And let me say to those brave protesters, there is power in speaking the truth. The mighty Chinese government might appear formidable, but all tyrants, all dictators fear truth. They fear dissidents. They fear sunlight. Some time ago, I had the opportunity to meet and visit with Natan, the famed Soviet dissident. He talked in Jerusalem. And Natan talked about how when he was in the Soviet Gulag, the prisoners would pass from cell to cell notes repeating the words of President Reagan. When the president said Marxism, Leninism will end up on the ash heap of history, the prisoners in the Gulag heard his words. When President Reagan said the Soviet Union was an evil empire, the prisoners of the Gulag heard his words. And when President Reagan stood before the Brandenburg Gate and said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," I believe those are the most important words uttered by a leader in modern time. And those words echoed into the darkest recesses of the prison cells. Now, many people don't know the backstory behind President Reagan's speech at the Brandenburg Gate. 3 times the U.S. State Department edited those words out of the speech. And 3 times Reagan wrote them back with his own hand. The State Department argued, "Mr. President, you can't say this. Mr. President, this is too belligerent. This is too provocative." And then their most formidable argument, "Mr. President, this is unrealistic. This will never, ever, ever happen. The Berlin Wall will stand forever." And Reagan finally, with a twinkle in his eye, he said, "You don't understand. This is the whole purpose of the speech." This summer, I had the opportunity to take my family, to take my daughters to Europe. We went to Berlin and stood on the spot where President Reagan gave that speech before the Brandenburg Gate, less than 3 years after he uttered those words. The Berlin Wall was torn to the ground, and here's the important part. It wasn't torn down by American tanks. It wasn't bombed by American missiles. It was rather the power of truth, the power of sunlight, that ended up causing the Soviet Union to collapse and tearing that wall down, freeing millions from oppression. Let me tell you, the men and women of Hong Kong are standing before their own Brandenburg Gate right now. And the Communist Party in China is shivering in terror. And what do we see? We see protesters in Hong Kong waving American flags, singing the American national anthem. I saw a picture a few weeks ago of a wall in Hong Kong where protesters had spray painted, "Give me liberty or give me death," the line from Patrick Henry's speech to the Second Virginia Convention, which brought Virginia into the Revolutionary War. Freedom is powerful, and America has a responsibility to speak out in support of freedom. Now, there are also concrete steps that we can and should take on the foreign policy front. After Britain ceded Hong Kong to China, the United States built up our diplomatic and our statutory framework to give Hong Kong special privileges and access on the premise and the promise that China would not encroach on Hong Kong's autonomy. That hasn't happened. The Chinese used Hong Kong's open economy to launder money, to evade tariffs, to break sanctions, and to acquire sensitive intellectual property. And more recently, they've made open and direct moves to encroach on Hong Kong's economy. In June of this year, I introduced the Hong Kong Policy Reevaluation Act, which would shine a light on China's encroachment and abuse of Hong Kong's autonomy. It would require the State Department to report on China's efforts to conduct espionage against foreign nationals, to run influence operations, and to violate civil liberties. As we watch what's unfolding in Hong Kong, I will continue to press the Hong Kong Policy Reevaluation Act until the authorities take steps to ensure that Hong Kong's special status is protected. Instead of allowing the Chinese Communist Party to erode Hong Kong's economy, Hong Kong officials should take steps to restore and to ensure that autonomy. And if that autonomy is not guaranteed, the United States should, and I believe we will, reevaluate our policy towards Hong Kong. Let me say finally, the struggle for freedom, for me and my family, as for billions across the globe, is not just an abstract principle. It is real and it is personal. When it comes to the tyranny of communism, my family has suffered it firsthand. My father was imprisoned and tortured in Cuba by the Batista regime, and my aunt, my Tia Sonia, was imprisoned and tortured in Cuba by Castro's communist regime. As a child, I grew up with my cousin Bibi, Tia Sonia's daughter, the two of us literally sitting at the feet of my dad and my aunt, hearing stories of fighting for freedom. So I closed the way I opened, saying to the people of Hong Kong, we see you. We hear you. The entire world sees and hears you, and your heroism at grave personal risk has power that defies words. It has power to terrify and tear down tyrannies. God be with you, and America is with you as well. Thank you.